You've been harshly critical of the president's mercantilism. You bring in an item from your Jackson Hole summit where you look at Herbert Hoover of May of 1930. What's the linkage there?
In May of 1930, 1,000 economists wrote an open letter to President Hoover urging him to veto what now we know as the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. The president then, like the president today, claimed he knew more than experts and ignored the overwhelming preponderance of advice he was getting, signed the law into place, and made a garden variety depression into a Great Depression. So there's a lot to be learned from history, and we are in danger of repeating the same mistakes we made back then by a president who refuses to listen to any expert opinion.
Do you see any study, do you see anything in your studies that the legislative branch can nudge a well-meaning president away from Elizabeth I economics?
Look, the Congress right now is in a rare agreement of bipartisan support to bash China. Republicans and Democrats alike are applauding the president, and they don't agree on almost any other issue that's on the legislative agenda right now, other than to blame China for the problems that in large part in the U.S. are of our own making, Tom.
And Marty, we heard actually from insiders on the Chinese side that China's trying to wait this out, but if a Democrat comes into power after the presidential elections, they may go even harder on China. So what does that mean for this future relationship?
Well, I think it bodes not well for that relationship. And look, I mean, Mr. Roach has said, and I've learned from that, the Chinese do not think in the context of months or even years. They think of generational change. And so the Chinese are going to prepare themselves for the long haul. And whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House in 2020, I think this relationship is going to be very difficult to solve.
Can I just interject one thing here?
Yeah, go ahead.
There is a story that, the Chinese, it was in the Wall Street Journal late last week, that the Chinese have decided to wait out until the next election, or that Trump, because of his bashing of Fed Chairman Powell, believes the U.S. economy is much weaker, and so they have the upper hand. I think those stories are really without merit. I go to China a lot. I was there a few weeks ago. There's no discussion of the Chinese wagering a bet on the 2020 election that will unseat Donald Trump, nor is there a view that the U.S. economy is terribly weak. I think the Chinese have learned, like most of us, to take virtually everything that comes out of the White House with more than the proverbial grain of salt. So I really draw this presumption that it's making its rounds that you just repeated into serious question.
Marty, let me ask you a little bit about what is coming out of the Trump administration. Was there, again, we understand from the Chinese side that actually they were very far apart in these negotiations a month ago. So why did the Trump administration almost lead the markets to believe that they were close to an agreement?
That's really hard to say. I mean, with this president, his pronouncements of optimism may be more about him than about the reality of the talks. And I do think that this whole notion of Donald Trump and Xi meeting together to sort of smooth the way to an agreement is kind of a false narrative. Those two leaders, the devil is in the details, and those two leaders are not going to sort out those details.
What'd you do, see my script today or something?
Sorry.
I mean, Marty's right on top of this. Dr. Roach, you told me once, you said, Tom, shut up and read this one book. And it was a giant, Jonathan Spence. He's at a school up in New Haven with good pizza. Okay, Jonathan Spence, The Khan's Great Continent, China in the Western Mind. Let's modernize it. President Xi's continent, it is a continent, China in Trump's mind as well. I mean, what does the president need to understand culturally about Spence's China right now?
The main lesson from that book that was written 20 years ago is that we have repeatedly, for hundreds and hundreds of years,
Misjudged.
made a mistake in looking at China the way we see ourselves. We look at China through the Western lens. Because the U.S. had a debt crisis, China must have a debt crisis.
What is the Eastern lens right now? What is the Beijing lens that you've observed in the last 2 weeks?
They're focused on rebalancing the economy from exports to consumption, from manufacturing to services, from imported to indigenous innovation, from surplus saving to saving absorption. They're changing their model. For some reason, we're uncomfortable with that because we like the old model better because it provided us with cheap goods and they bought a lot of treasuries, and that's where we want China to be. And China's saying, look, what was then is not now, and we're changing because it's in our best interest to change. The U.S., by the way, is not changing its model of deficit saving, budget deficits, large current accounts, and a multilateral trade deficit last year that included China and 101 other countries. We're not changing. China is. And that's what I wrote the book about a few years ago on the codependency
Right.
of the U.S. and China.